Welcome to the final round of Big Questions debate, a debate format sponsored by, as far as a grant from the John Templeton Foundation. This year, students have grappled with complex worldview questions as they debate both sides of the topic. Resolved, humans are primarily driven by self-interest. Thanks to the generosity of the John Templeton Foundation, the NSDA has given over $1.5 million to speech and debate programs since 2016, while creating opportunities for students to debate topics at the intersection of science, philosophy, and theology. Now to introduce our esteemed judging panel. Matthew Brandstetter from BL Debate, Canada. Stephen Green, Caney Creek, Texas. Tiana Marion, Salinas South High School, Kansas. Remy Moet Buenaparte, East Chapel Hill High School, North Carolina. Robin Rose from Lake Oswego Senior High School, Oregon. Rachel Russell, Lee Summit High School North, Missouri. Marna Weston, Abraham Lincoln, MA, Florida. Angela Wynn from W.B. Ray High School, Texas. And last but not least, Scott Woods out of Basis, Arizona. This year, we began with 110 Big Questions debaters. We are now down to the final two. Congratulations to both finalists. Good luck, and let's start the round.
Hello. Before I begin, I'd like to extend some thank yous to some important people in my life. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my coaches. Mariah, Lauren, Sid, and Riley have all been examples of hard work and dedication that make me want to be better. Thank you to Mr. Kerry Konda for cultivating a program that makes national champions as well as incredible people. The impact you have is clear walking down the halls at school and seeing dozens of pictures of national and state finalists over the years. Thank you to Coach Levi Marolies for being the first person to really see me. I would not be on the stage without your dedication to your students and the special care you've put in to make sure that I know I deserve to be here. I can't ever thank you enough, but I hope getting you out of judging this round comes close. Of course, I have to thank my teammates because I would not be here today without them. Thank you to Kate, especially, who I had to knock out of the competition on Wednesday. You could have gone so much further. And to Abia, a National Student of the Year finalist, state champ, and close friend, you challenged me to be as incredible as you are every day. To the Aberdeen Central LD team of Matt, Dustin, Brianna, David, Emmy, Hegon, Decca, and Tyler, you're my family forever and always. Finally, to Jordan Phillips, reigning extem commentary champ, your example has led me to this stage. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the LD community and my state as a whole. Thank you for keeping everything running and for cheering me on even when I was crying on the floor at state. And thank you to my competitors who have challenged me to be humble and a better person overall. Thank you to my parents, Mom for driving me home from every single tournament, even at 2 in the morning, and for getting me a car so I could do it myself. And Dad for always listening to me rant even when you had no idea what I was talking about. I'm forever grateful for all of your support. Thank you to my very best friend in the world, Julia. Even after quitting debate and vowing to never talk about a criterion again, you have been my biggest supporter and cheerleader, and have sat through more debate-related tears than anyone I know. I love you, and I can't wait to show you my trophy when I get home. Thank you to my school district for your endless support of our program, and thank you to every teacher who's ever given me makeup work for an assignment that I missed for a debate tournament. There are lots of them. And I'd like to extend a special thank you to the NSDA and the John Templeton Foundation, and Officer Mitchell with the Mesa Police Department. The opportunities of each of these organizations provides are actively changing lives for the better. We are all here in this room or watching online thanks to the countless dedicated individuals within the NSDA that have made this week so incredible. Thank you. Take a drink. And with that, if my opponent and all of my judges are ready, then I will begin a 5-minute speech in affirmation. Voltaire once said, "Common sense is not so common," a sentiment that should be taken into consideration more in our lives. We must be able to look past our preconceived notions of morality and reasoning to truly understand what drives us. That's why I stand in firm affirmation of the resolution resolved. Humans are primarily driven by self-interest. Observation. Human drive is complicated, and what is or isn't in our self-interest is possibly even more complicated. So when looking at this topic, we should be looking at the whole picture of human reasoning, including what goes into initial decisions and the reflection that influences our next decisions. Now I'll offer some definitions. First, primarily from Oxford Languages, is for the most part or mainly. 2, driven by Cambridge, is someone who is driven is so determined to achieve something or be successful that all of their behavior is directed towards this aim. And 3, self-interest, from the American Psychological Association, one's personal advantage or benefit. Self-interested behavior includes both the pursuit of rewards and benefits and the avoidance of cost, dangers, and harm. Contention 1, Kohlberg's theory of moral development. First, let's look at how we make decisions the first time. The theory of moral development is based on the idea that human beings pass through 3 levels of reasoning and decision-making between infancy and adulthood. The first level includes children under 6 years old and contains 2 stages based on avoiding punishments and seeking rewards. This is pure self-interest. The second level includes children between 7 and 11 years old and contains 2 stages based on conformity with our peers in the law, and is where we first see self-interest in interactions with the rest of society. The third level is what most people over the age of 11 are technically capable of, and is where we see truly altruistic behavior without thinking of personal gain. The highest level is eliminating all personal bias or connection and looking only at the facts and impacts of a situation. While the majority of people, anyone over the age of 11, are capable of level 3 decision-making, it's not what primarily drives us. According to McLeod in 2023, only 10 to 15% are capable of abstract thinking necessary for stage 5 or 6 post-conventional morality. That is to say, most people take their moral views from those around them, and only a minority think through ethical principles for themselves. Generally, while people are capable of thinking and acting outside their self-interest, most people are never actually driven by that altruistic thinking. The mere capability of non-self-interested thought is not the same thing as a primary motivator of humans generally. Yes, in certain situations, people display non-self-interested behavior, but scientifically and historically, people primarily are incapable of higher-level moral decision-making. Contention 2, choice supportive bias. Now let's look at how we reflect on decisions we've already made and how the perceptions we create of those outcomes influence our next decisions. There are a myriad of unconscious biases that affect every person, including one called a choice supportive bias. According to Lind et al. In 2017, quote, false memory in the context of choice supportiveness is when new attributes that were not part of the original options are remembered as presented, and if their values are considered positive as belonging to the chosen option, and if negative as belonging to the foregone option. They represent a more dramatic and radical departure from reality than simple fact distortions, in that an entire new piece of non-existing evidence is remembered, unquote. Now that was a convoluted run-on sentence, so let's break down what it actually means. Basically, we like to reflect on our decisions as if only positive outcomes came from them, even remembering more positive outcomes than actually happened. In general, people enjoy being correct, and will therefore insist that their intentions in any given situation led to the good outcome of said situation. This bias exists in conjunction with hindsight bias. According to Kerry in 2022, quote, the term hindsight bias refers to the tendency people have to view events as more predictable than they really are. Before an event takes place, while you might be able to offer a guess as to the outcome, there's really no way to know what's actually going to happen, unquote. So we guess at what the outcome will be, which is where that choice supportive bias comes in again. The last time a similar decision was made, it was beneficial. We are biased to make that decision again because we believe it was a positive outcome the first time. That drives our future decisions in similar situations, believing that it will have a similar, self-interested outcome. This phenomenon means that we never really know what our original intentions were, but we believe they were self-interested and will be driven by that same self-interested outcome, making those decisions in and of themselves self-interested. When we look at hindsight bias in tandem with our choice supportive biases, it's not that far of a leap to believe that people choose to believe that their actions actually were in their self-interest, despite what their original intentions were. Regardless of what step in the decision-making process determines drive, it's clear that primarily we are driven by self-interest. People default to making self-interested decisions because they're easier to rationalize and because they protect us. This bias towards self-interest only gets stronger after the fact. If I make a decision that works to my benefit, I'm going to be motivated to make a similar decision in the future. In this way, we are always motivated by self-interest based on our past outcomes. While humans are capable of community-based altruistic thinking, that is not how we primarily make decisions. Humans primarily default to self-interested modes of thought. Then, when we gain benefits from the self-interested decisions we made, we are influenced to use that same method for future decisions. And it's for these reasons that I can only urge a ballot in affirmation.
Okay, everybody. Just before I start, I'd like to extend a few quick thank yous. First of all, I'd like to just note how crazy it is that I'm standing here today. It's amazing. When I came into this tournament, I had no idea that I would be standing here before you. So that in and of itself is incredible. And then I'd like to extend thank yous to Clara, Amethyst, and Talia, who have gone on this journey with me. It's been incredible doing this with you, and I wouldn't be able to do this without you all by my side. I'd like to thank my mom, my dad, and my sister, who don't understand any of the debate jargon I use, but are here supporting me anyway and online. And I'd like to thank Coach B. You've been instrumental in me getting here. I'm so thankful for all your help. And my coaches that have come before that we didn't pay, that spent their time volunteering to get us to where we are now. I'd like to thank our teacher advisor. You are amazing. Even though you don't come to all the tournaments, you're always there supporting us. I want to thank the foundation that gave us the money to hire our coach this year in the first place. You are instrumental to my presence here on this stage today. I want to thank my team and members of my community watching at home. I really appreciate all of you. I want to thank my mentor at the very beginning, Gabby, and Maureen, who has been along with me this entire ride. I want to thank my friends and family. I want to thank all the teachers that are letting me make up the finals that I'm missing to be here right now. And I want to say congratulations to everyone who's made it to the national tournament. That in and of itself is a great accomplishment. I want to extend congratulations to my amazing opponent. I'm so excited to debate you today. I want to thank the NSDA for hosting this magical event. It's truly been an amazing experience. I will remember this for the rest of my life. And now, with that said, if all my judges are ready, okay, awesome. I'll start time on my first word. Opponent ready? Okay, perfect. It's because of all the altruistic actions that got me on this stage here today that I negate the resolution resolved. Humans are primarily driven by self-interest. To start, the negative debater offers the following definitions for clarification in this round. Primarily means of chief importance. Self-interest is one's personal interest or advantage, especially when pursued without regard for others. Altruism is behavior motivated by a desire to benefit someone other than oneself, and to be driven is to be propelled or motivated by something. Next, the negative offers an observation on the resolution to frame this debate. Because the opposite of self-interest is altruism, while the affirmative argues that self-interest is the primary motivator for action, the negative defends altruism as a motivator equal to or greater than self-interest to win this round. If there is any doubt that self-interest is the primary motivator for human action in the majority of circumstances, it must be a negative vote. Contention 1 is altruism has a biological basis. Empirical evidence shows humans evolved to be altruistic. Larry 2021 writes, humans behave altruistically towards strangers with no chance of reciprocation. Evolutionary theorists argue that human altruism evolved through group selection, in which groups of altruists were naturally selected for because they had a comparative advantage over other groups. Human altruistic dispositions evolved through cultural group selection and gene culture coevolution, and there is empirical evidence in support. In addition, human motivations have plasticity, thus it's impossible to single out self-interest as a primary motivator in the first place. Agnew 2014 writes, although social concern tends to dominate social life, it's frequently possible for a small number of cheaters to take advantage of the social concern shown by others. As such, there is tendency for individuals to exhibit some plasticity, acting on social concern in some circumstances and on self-interest in others. Not only is it impossible to identify self-interest as a primary motivator, but altruism is a default human behavior in most situations. Experiments with children prove they are altruistic. It's our most fundamental drive. Wernicke and Tomasello 0407 write, pro-social behaviors are at the core of the human condition. Children as young as 12 months show concern for others in distress and sometimes intervene by comforting them. Most recently, it's been shown that 18-month-old children perform unrewarded acts of instrumental helping. Importantly, children did not perform these acts in controlled conditions where no help was needed. In these acts of instrumental helping, the children understood the other's unachieved goal and were motivated to help him achieve it. Even adults exhibit these altruistic tendencies towards total strangers. Agnew 14 writes, people are inclined to help innocent others in distress, particularly when they personally encounter these others. This is the case even when there is no benefit and some cost to providing said help. This proves that even without a personal connection, individuals act in ways which harm themselves in order to act altruistically by helping others. Contention 2 is cooperative behavior throughout human history proves altruism is stronger than self-interest. Interdisciplinary evidence proves that cooperation is more common than selfishness throughout history and in present day. Banklor 11 writes, 75% of US cities with populations of more than 50,000 have successfully adopted some form of community policing, which reduces crime not by imposing harsher penalties, but by humanizing the interactions of the police with local communities. Dozens of field studies have identified cooperative systems, many of which are more stable and effective than incentive-based ones. And in experiments about a cooperative behavior, a minority of people, about 30%, behave as though they are selfish. However, 50% systematically and predictably behave cooperatively. In no society examined under controlled conditions have the majority of people consistently behaved selfishly. Contention 3 is giving in the world around us, and subpoint A is parents. KidSpot17 writes, Angel Care's food insecurity report showed that parents, particularly single parents, made sacrifices so that their children could eat. Parents skipped meals more frequently than children, cut meal sizes, and went hungry in order for their children to eat. Parents devote their material wealth, time, and energy into raising their children, even going so far as to sacrifice their health and well-being in the process to give their children better lives. Subpoint B is charity. The act of forsaking your own wealth to improve someone else's life is fundamentally altruistic, and in behavior manifests in people across the world. Data collected by the World Population Review in 2020 reveals that some of the most charitable nations in the world are developing, such as Nigeria, Myanmar, and Ghana, all which rank within the top 10. In addition, Axelrod 14 notes poor and middle-class Americans are more likely to donate than are the wealthiest people in the country. According to a report released by Monday by the Chronicle of Philanthropy, between 2006 and 2012, Americans earning less than $100,000 increased the amount they gave by 4.5%. This tells us that the amount of wealth people have is irrelevant to the amount they give. Altruism persists. Subpoint C is frontline workers. Broadleaf 23 writes, 82% of all workers in the US are in frontline roles. The altruistic tendencies of frontline workers were highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic, where nurses, doctors, EMTs, and many more continued to help those in need in the midst of a dangerous viral outbreak. Do It All 20 notes, healthcare workers caring for patients with COVID-19 had low stress levels, although they still had fear of being infected. A low stress level among healthcare workers indicated their professional devotion and altruism during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's because of the persistence of healthcare and other frontline workers every day and during the COVID-19 pandemic specifically, along with the sacrifices of parents, donations of people across the world, even those without enough wealth to sustain themselves in the first place, and cooperation that guides our actions every day, that I am proud to negate this resolution. And I stand ready for cross.
Okay, as I spoke first, may I have first question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, then if all judges are ready, I will begin 3 minutes of questioning starting now. How many people were frontline workers in the pandemic?
So what I'm saying is that right now in the current day, we see 82% of Americans taking on frontline roles. And what I'm saying then is the frontline workers who continued to work during the pandemic were displaying their altruism.
Okay, so can I have a follow-up on that?
Yeah.
You're saying 82% of people are frontline workers that worked altruistically in the pandemic.
No, those are two different facts. What I'm saying is that frontline workers, many of which rushed back to their jobs during the pandemic, still work today in those frontline roles, and we still see this 82%, which is a majority of society, thereby upholding the resolution in the first place by showing that people will act altruistically and give up their lives, take on this risk of death by going to work every day and serving others in need while receiving little to no benefit for themselves. Can I have a question?
Yes.
Okay, so if we're looking at this C1 of we're talking about benefits, and we're saying that idealistically people above the age of, 11, are acting altruistically, but we don't see that. How is that a reason to vote for the affirmative?
Okay, so once again, what we're seeing here is that only 10 to 15% of people are capable of making decisions that are not inherently self-interested. So what we're going to be seeing at the end of the day is that while technically everyone could be capable of this, which is why we do see altruistic behavior, it's not what's primarily driving us. It's not what most people are doing, and it's not what people are doing.
Can I have a quick follow-up?
Yes.
So where exactly are we getting this number 10 to 15% are only ever always capable of acting altruistically?
Yeah, so that's from McLeod in 2023 that was published in the simplypsychology.org. He has a PhD in psychology and has published several studies.
Okay, so that's saying that no one else outside that 10 to 15% can act altruistically?
Not primarily.
Not primarily, and how is he exactly determining that?
Okay, so once again, we're going to be seeing that it's through the stages of moral development. The study is used by asking people moral questions and asking what they would do, and then once they have the answer, they ask why they made those choices. And those choices are only ever altruistic or non-self-interested in about 10 to 15% of people total.
Okay, you can have a question.
Okay, going back over the idea of cooperation, you say that 30% of people behave selfishly, but 50% of people cooperate. Can you just tell me more about that study?
Yeah, so essentially what I'm saying in this card is that empirics have shown, I can pull up the study or show that to you at a later date, but essentially what this card is boiling down to is that in controlled conditions, when we're eliminating other motivators, we inherently see people acting cooperatively, acting altruistically, at least 50% of the time, thereby fulfilling my observation and the burden that I set for today's round. But even then, you only ever see 30%, a minority, a significant minority, systematically behaving selfishly and prioritizing their self-interest.
Okay, can I have a follow-up on that?
Yeah.
How did we determine that number?
How are we determining that number? So the way that that number was determined was by conducting studies in which people were forced, or they felt some sort of dilemma. They were faced with a conflict and then seeing how they reacted, essentially.
Okay, and were they asked why they made those choices?
They weren't. This is observing the behavior. So we can tell their motivations essentially by seeing what they're doing. If we see cooperative behavior taking place, we can inherently deduce that that was made and people were valuing the decisions that the group was making and the effects on the group to an equal degree that they were valuing the effects on themselves.
And that's time. I will take some running prep starting now. I'll stop prep there with a minute and 20 seconds used, which is 140 remaining. Quick roadmap, I'll be going over framing definitions and then down the negative case. Any of my judges not ready, or my opponent? Okay, wonderful. Then I will begin my 4-minute speech and affirmation, starting now. First, on definition debate, we're going to look to the definition of primarily. My opponent says that it's chiefly or first off, but what we're going to want to look at here is that every other definition from Oxford, Merriam-Webster, Cambridge, and dictionary.com are all looking at what most people do most of the time. We should be looking to the common man's definition in a common man's debate. Same thing with the definition of driven as compelled. I can give you a definition from Cambridge, a definition from Oxford Languages, and a definition from Merriam-Webster that are talking about driven as a conscious choice. Therefore, once again, that's what we should be looking at. Even if you don't want to believe that, you can see that we cannot know what unconsciously drives us. We can't know what compels us every second of every day, but we can know what conscious choices we take. Going down to observations, we're going to see that my opponent says that altruism is the opposite of self-interest, so they just have to prove that altruism is more important than self-interest. First of all, opposite of self-interest is not inherently altruism. Self-interest can be the opposite of altruism or the opposite of self-destruction. There's a lot of different ways to look at this, and my opponent doesn't have to prove altruism, they have to disprove self-interest. Now let's get into actual contention levels. First, on contention 1 of biology, about how humans are inherently altruistic. My opponent talks here about infant altruism too, but just top shelf, we're going to see that my opponent never proves that primarily altruism is what's driving us here. My opponent never proves that that's what's driving most people most of the time, and my opponent never actually proves drive here. The capability of altruism and these altruistic outcomes do not inherently mean that people were driven by altruism, which we'll get down to later too. We're also going to be seeing on infant altruism specifically that my opponent talks about how infants here should be the benchmark. However, what we're going to see is, according to Dunfield, a member of the Queen's University Department of Psychology in 2010, quote, "Even in the earliest instances of helping behavior, infants are not indiscriminate, but instead they direct their help on the basis of previous interactions with individuals. Infants thus do not solely avoid helping previously unwilling individuals, but will selectively help those who have shown a willingness to provide," unquote. Therefore, children are not inherently altruistic. Their seemingly altruistic actions are actually self-interested based on reciprocation. So what we're going to be seeing here too is that even if there is a seemingly altruistic action, largely those are based in reciprocation. They're based in safety. You can see from my contention 1 on Kohlberg that inherently people want to fit into societies. That's the level 3 and 4 that humans inherently default back to, and those levels are conforming with society, so therefore it's still self-interested. Then we're going to be going down to the contention 2 on cooperation. My opponent gives a study here about how 30% of people behave selfishly and 50% of people cooperate. However, when asked in cross-sex, my opponent could not tell you that they were determining drive in this study. There were outcomes that were seemingly altruistic, but my opponent cannot tell you if people were driven to make that choice based on altruism or self-interest. However, go back to my McLeod 2023 study that shows you that 10 to 15% of people are ever capable of being driven by something that's not self-interested. Self-interest is morally neutral. It doesn't have any moral judgment on it. Just because a good outcome comes out of a self-interested decision does not mean that it's not self-interested. Then we're going to be going down to contention 3 on giving. Parents, first and foremost, we're going to see that there's 3 main responses to this idea of parents being super altruistic. We're going to see that 1, Kohlberg proves that parents are still self-interested. Level 3 of Kohlberg's moral development theory is based in conformity with society. The reason many people have children is to be part of a society that demands marriage and children. Conformity is still self-interest. 2, the negative assumes that any use of time, money, or energy is not within our self-interest. Children are a legitimate reason to spend time, money, and energy. It is in no one's self-interest to hoard money, disconnect from society, and sit around conserving their energy. And 4, turn, many parents do not act altruistically. According to Brown with the National Library of Medicine in 2022, quote, approximately 1 in 4 children experience child abuse or neglect in their lifetime, unquote. Therefore, many parents do not act altruistically towards their children, and unless my opponent can prove that the majority of humanity parents altruistically, then they will not win this point. At the end of the day, we're going to be seeing that all of the actions that my opponent talks about as giving are based in altruism and cooperation, which are inherently still self-interested, and that is why I can only urge a ballot in affirmation.
Okay. I'm gonna start running prep. right now. Okay, that was 101 on prep. So just for an off-time roadmap, I'm going to start with framing of the debate and some definitions, and then I'll later move on to my opponent's 2 contentions. Is everyone ready? Okay, awesome. Opponent ready? Cool. Start time on my first one. Judges, we're going to be looking to the top of my opponent's flow and going down it. First of all, they say that the human drive is complicated, and we have to look at the whole picture of human reasoning. That's going to flow in favor of the negation. Let's look at why. First of all, what that means is in order to prove primary in this context, my opponent has to show you that when self-interest and altruism actually come into conflict, when people are forced to choose between themselves and the group, they actively, the majority of the time, at the very least, choose themselves. They don't sufficiently do that. We'll explore that later. First of all, this definition of primarily is most part. I agree with that. Our definitions are essentially the same. I'm saying chief importance, that can be narrowed down to the same thing. Now they're saying that driven means all behavior, and that essentially this is going to mean all conscious behavior. This is going to work against my opponent. Let's explore why later in their second contention. But first of all, C1 of the benefits. They're saying that they've outlined the different stages to you of human life, and they're saying that only people past the age of 11 can actually act purely altruistically. I would say this flows in the favor of the negation for 2 key reasons. First of all, we're seeing that in the majority of society, people are over the age of 11. So if you're using this idealistic situation, it actually flows in the favor of the negation. And then second of all, I would tell you that if we're only weighing pure altruism, that's going to be difficult to do. And in second place, I don't even have to prove to you that altruism is being prioritized. I'll remind you of the burden of the negation in this case, which has only been set by the negation. I'm telling you that I have to say only that altruism and self-interest are valued equally, or that self-interest or altruism is valued more. Not that altruism is primary. That's an unfair and abusive burden to set. Now, once again, they're saying that this one study is going to be applicable to the general human society. I would tell you, first of all, no. You can look to my concrete examples of how people are actually behaving in the real world and not just under controlled conditions. But even then, I give you plenty of statistics telling you that under controlled conditions, they will at least 50% of the time behave cooperatively, altruistically. Now, they're saying that some people can be motivated, but they're not actually motivated by altruism. I'll tell you, first of all, how do we determine that? Because they're saying that people are reflecting, and they're saying that they only acted altruistically out of their self-interest. Once again, I tell you that that's essentially a negative ballot, because if we see them valuing their own well-being to the same degree as they're valuing the group's well-being, that's going to be valuing them both equally. That's going to be a neg ballot. Now they're saying science and history reflect our altruism. I would say instead you look to my Bankler 11 card, which tells you that in society today we have a majority of cooperative systems. Look to this study, which tells you the U.S. actually has 75% of cities with populations of over 50,000 forming these cooperative systems. This is proving altruism. Now let's look at their C2 of the hindsight bias. First of all, I would tell you that under their definition of driven, you can't even apply this in today's round. If it's an unconscious tentative pattern for us to eliminate the negative emotions that we're feeling and always be motivated by self-interest and eliminate negative things, that's inherently not going to flow through to the side of the affirmative, because that's not being considered consciously. And then I would tell you that if they're saying that we actually are doing this consciously, that we're consciously suppressing these actions and thoughts that are not in our self-interest, that in the first place, that's not going to flow through, because that's not what they're talking about. And then also, in the second place, if we're actively suppressing these self-interested thoughts, why is that necessarily in our self-interest in the first place? Because then we're avoiding doing things that are actively going to harm us, or that are going to help us. Now they're talking about unconscious bias, and once again, this unconscious bias isn't going to flow through because that doesn't fit under their definition that they give you of driven. You can wipe this off the side of the flow. Then they're saying we're guessing at the outcome because we never really know, so it's self-interest. I would tell you, once again, this is relying on the fact that we're using this unconscious bias to guide our everyday thoughts. This isn't under their definition of self-interest. Then I would tell you, once again, how are we always eliminating and using these road-colored glasses? I would tell you that we actively look to examples in the status quo of people that are recognizing these negative aspects of society and working to combat them. Let's look at the frontline workers I tell you about. Let's look at the parents who recognize that their children are starving, or the frontline workers who are recognizing that people are dying, that we actively have these issues in society we need to combat. Those people are not putting on these rose-colored glasses because they're actively working against their self-interest when they put their own lives at risk. Once again, what this debate is going to come down to is that my opponent actually gives you no concrete examples of people actively putting their own self-interest over the interests of the community. That means that they're not proving to you primarily due to our seated definition that we both agree on, because they're not proving that we will always promote our own self-interest over the groups. And I stand ready for cross.
As I was first speaker, may I have first question?
Yeah.
Okay, then I will begin 3 minutes if all of my judges are ready. Starting now. I'm going to go back to that study on the 30 and 50%.
Yeah.
Once again, do you ever show why people made these decisions?
So what I'm saying is, in the first place, because we're acting cooperatively 50% of the time, that means that in the decision-making process, since the group and us benefit equally, we had to value those two equally in the first place. And then I would tell you that even if somehow we're valuing the group's interest only for our self-interest in the first place, once again, that doesn't go to primarily because we're saying of chief importance, and we had to value both equally in order to act out of the interests of both. And then on top of that, I would tell you that this isn't even an example you could turn in your favor, because since the group is benefiting, that's always going to be altruistic, because there's only one definition of altruism in that round, and it means helping the group. Can I have a question?
Yes.
Okay. So once again, if we're looking at this hindsight bias, you say in your case that it's an unconscious bias. How can we use this to evaluate the round?
Yeah, so that was a misunderstanding of the point. What this is basically saying is that we view our past decisions only as the positive outcomes that come from them, and that part is not what I'm arguing is self-interested. What I'm saying is, because we see these good outcomes, we see these benefits, we are going to make decisions in the future that were like the decisions we made the first time. If I had water before this round and felt a lot better because of it, I'm going to drink water again before my next round because it was a good choice. So what I'm saying is that benefits have an influence on our next decisions, and because we benefited from something, it made us feel better. That's in our self-interest. It's going to motivate us to make similar decisions in the future.
Okay, can I have a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
So if we're using these benefits to determine our next course of action, why then do we see people actively and consecutively risking their lives to help others? Why do we see these altruistic acts still taking place if they're not making us feel good?
Okay, so the assumption that they don't necessarily make us feel good is flawed logic. So first of all, frontline workers that you're talking about, number one, during the pandemic couldn't just find another job. Also, they already had the job that they had. They were getting paid more money than they were before the pandemic, and they were getting other benefits. So we're still seeing inherent self-interest benefits to the person.
Okay.
And once again, we have that McLeod 2023 card showing us that 10 to 15% of people do act altruistically, but when we're looking at what most of humanity does and what most of humanity is driven by, we're going to be seeing that it's self-interest.
So just one quick follow-up. On this 10 to 15%, if we're saying that only 10 to 15% of people can act altruistically, why do we see many more actually acting altruistically? Like, is this saying that this 10 to 15% is purely altruism and the rest is self-interest? I'm still confused.
I'm not saying that they're purely altruistic. I'm saying those are people that are capable of making purely altruistic choices.
Okay.
But once again, the burden is not on me to provide that that's most of society. If you would like to disagree with that, then you would have to provide a statistic saying that all of the people that you're talking about, like these frontline workers, are more than 10 to 15% of the general population, and that they are inherently driven by something other than self-interest.
Yeah.
And that is 4 seconds left. I will stop there with 40 more seconds used, which is 1 minute remaining. Quick off-time roadmap, framing, and then Aff Neg. Anyone not ready? Then I will begin my 3-minute speech and affirmation, starting now. First, going over definitions, we're going to see that my opponent basically conceded to the definitions of primary and drive. So once again, we're looking at primarily as for the most part or mainly. That's what we're going to be seeing. So we need a statistical and we need a numerical majority on this. And for drive, we're going to be looking to conscious choice. Once again, my opponent says that this turns case, but I'm going to show you why it doesn't as we go down. Then we're going to see contention 1 on Kohlberg. My opponent said that this flows neg because we're only weighing pure altruism here. However, number one, we're not only weighing pure altruism here. We're going to be seeing that pure altruism does in fact feed into self-interest most of the time, because only 10 to 15% of people are actually capable of non-self-interested thinking. Just because a good outcome comes out of something or because an outcome benefits people, that does not mean that people were driven by that good benefit. Once again, we have to look to every word in the resolution, so we have to prove that people are primarily driven by self-interest or altruism, one of the two, not just that they can act with benefits to the self-interest or altruism. Then we're going to be seeing that my opponent also said on this that we have to look at how people are behaving in the real world and how 50% of people behave cooperatively and altruistically. However, a couple problems with this. Number one, how are people behaving in the real world is not showing any kind of actual statistic, and my opponent likes to say that we should not be looking at something that was researched in a lab. We need to look at how real people act in the real world. However, there's really no way to mark that. What we're seeing, though, is that this specific study, this McCloy 2023 study that analyzed a bunch of other studies, shows us that they specifically looked into why people made the decisions that they did, the conscious choices that they took to do the things that they did, and that's what the resolution's asking us to look at. And once again, even if you don't believe that, the 50% that my opponent is talking about is 50% of people believe in cooperation and act in cooperation. However, once again, what we're going to be seeing is that cooperation is still inherently self-interested. We have these reciprocal relationships with the people and communities in our lives, so we give to them and they give back to us. Cooperation is inherently self-interested, and my opponent has never answered this argument. Then we're going to be going down to contention 2 on choice supportive bias. My opponent said that this can't apply because it's unconscious, and according to the definition of drive that I gave, it doesn't matter. However, as I answered in cross-sex, this is a misunderstanding of this point. We're going to be seeing that unconsciously we do see all of the outcomes of things that we've done as positive, but looking back at those outcomes and analyzing those outcomes is what drives our next decisions consciously. If I do something that benefits me, I'm going to do similar things in the future. If I made an argument in my quarterfinal round that worked, I'm going to make that same argument here today because it was beneficial to me the first time, and that's how this choice supportive bias point works. Then quickly going over to the neg, my opponent did not get back to this side, but we're going to be looking at the fact that this entire case is based on altruism and cooperation. But we're going to be seeing once again that altruism and cooperation are inherently self-interested. You can see that with my Kohlberg contention that people fit into society and fit into the laws as is in their self-interest, and that's what's primarily driving them. So at the end of the day, all neg points flip over to the aff, and you're going to be seeing self-interest that way, and I could only urge a ballot in affirmation.
Okay, I'll be starting running prep, and I'll start that now. Okay, that was 224 on prep. Just as an off-time roadmap for this round, or for this speech, I'm going to be doing some framing at the top and definitions, and then I'll be moving down extensions on my case, and I'll flip over to my opponent's case, and I'll do some voters at the end. Is everyone all set? Okay, awesome. Opponent all set? Okay, I'll start telling my first word. Judges, remember, if we're using these 2 definitions of primarily and driven to evaluate the round, it's gonna be a negative vote. Let's explore why. First of all, this burden, I'll extend it into this round. This went essentially unresponded to in the consolidation, so I'll remind you my opponent can't respond to it in their next speech. What that tells you is that as the negative, I only have to prove that altruism is valued greater than or equal to self-interest to win the round. Since my opponent is coming up here and saying the only way we can evaluate it is based on this one study they give you, telling that people in some circumstances will 10 to 15% only behave altruistically. I say that's an incredibly abusive and harmful way that we can evaluate this round because it should include much more than just their one study that they've extended. But then I would tell you that inherently we can look to the results of these actions and who's actually benefiting to deduce motivators. If only the community is benefiting from an action that you're taking, we can deduce that it was taken with pure altruism or at the very least a majority of altruism. Now let's look at my extensions. First of all, extend the biological basis. My Valeric 21 card tells you that humans help change without chance of reciprocation. What this means is that we're not doing it for conformity, we're not doing it for some benefit in the end, we're not expecting that, we're doing it because we're altruistic. Now extend my study, my Warnecken and Temelso 07 card that says that children will help others with no benefit and some cost. This essentially debunks their entire study that they're basing the entire round on, because what they're saying is children will always act self-interestedly. Now, since I've proven that this study cannot be applicable to the entirety of the world because we see other studies actively working against it, let's refer and move on to my C2 of history and today. Once again, my Bankler 11 card is going to be key. It's telling you that 50% of people in these experiments will systematically behave cooperatively. Once again, since we're looking at who's benefiting from these actions, because of course we can't dig into the heads of everyone and determine those motivations, we're going to note that people without fail in empirics will systematically behave cooperatively at least 50% of the time. That's fulfilling that burden. Now let's look to my C3 of giving. Once again, they didn't extend any of their responses to this contention in their last speech. Don't let them bring them up later. With that said, let's extend my points. First of all, this subpoint A of parents, once again extend my Kid Spot 17 card that's telling you parents will forsake meals. They will forsake their lives for their kids. My opponent's responses, which they didn't extend, tell you that parents only do this to conform, and children are the legit reason. I tell you they're a legit reason because their parents care about them. Now let's look to charity. Once again, this is going to be key in this round because my Axelrad 14 card is telling you that middle-class Americans will donate the most. People with the least wealth are the most altruistic. And frontline workers, that's 82% of the population. That's a majority. They're risking their lives. Now let's look at the C1 of benefits. They're talking about this punishment, and they talk about this one study which they focus on. Once again, I've already debunked that study with an alternative study telling you that children are inherently altruistic. But even then, once again, I would tell you that just because 15 to 10% of the population in adulthood behaves purely altruistically, that doesn't meet my burden. I only have to prove to you that they value altruism and self-interest equally. Now in this hindsight bias, once again, I fail to see the relevance in this round, how we do things that benefit us. That's not addressing the conflict with altruism at all. So therefore, we can't say that this is necessarily primarily in the resolution. Once again, this is non-topical essentially, and it doesn't have any relevance. Okay.
I will use the remaining 1 minute of my prep, starting now. And that is my prep expired. Okay. Judges ready? And opponent? Okay. I'll be going over framework, voters, and then I will begin starting now. Okay, so first we're going to be looking over how we have to look to every single word of the resolution in today's debate. My opponent has brought up some really interesting points on altruism, self-interest, and what we really act on and how altruism affects the world. But what the resolution is asking us in today's round is what drives people. The definition of drive in this round is based on conscious choices that we make. At the point that my opponent cannot tell you why people make the choices that they make, but I can, then you're going to be having an Aff ballot every single time. We're also going to be seeing on observations that my opponent talks at the beginning of the round about how they only have to prove that altruism is at least as important as self-interest, if not more, because they're opposites. However, this is a fallacy that my opponent is perpetuating, that altruism and self-interest are on opposite sides of a spectrum. But what we are looking at is that self-interest and altruism go hand in hand. We give to society because it reciprocates back to us, a point that my opponent has never disproven. They've simply said that altruism is real. And every time that my opponent gets up here and tells you that altruism is real, they are feeding into the affirmative side. Knowing that, let's get into voters. We're going to look first voter of altruism, basically neg contentions. Once again, we're going to be seeing that the neg never actually shows us what drives people. They talk about biology, they talk about cooperation, and they talk about people giving to other people. But I'd like to first point out that they dropped their case in the first rebuttal, and then they say that I can't bring things up that I dropped at one point, but then says that they dropped their entire case. So at the end of the day, what we're going to be looking at is, even if we are looking to drops, we're going to see that the neg dropped their case. But regardless, we're going to go over down to contention level, and we are going to see that once again, biology and cooperation are not unself-interested. At the end of the day, my opponent has not answered the argument that altruism is inherently self-interested because of reciprocation, has not answered the argument that when we see infant altruism is because they know that they will get something in return. So at the end of the day, when we look to what the resolution is asking us, you have to realize that my opponent has never answered that question. Then the second main voter of today's round is going to be the Aff contention level. First, we're going to be going over the Kohlberg and the McLeod 2023 card that I've been pulling throughout this round. We're going to see that Kohlberg has never actually been disproven, and this idea of the moral development theory has not been warranted or argumented with a warrant. But we're going to be seeing that this study looks into the actual drivers behind people. People were given moral dilemmas, they were asked to evaluate them, and then they were asked why they evaluated them, what conscious choices they made, and why they would make those decisions. So at the end of the round, you're going to be seeing that the only piece of evidence that actually talks about human drive is this McLeod 2023 card, which says that only 10 to 15% of people are ever capable of anything other than inherently self-interested decisions. We're going to be seeing, too, on my choice supportive bias point, that it is a real-world example that my opponent keeps talking about. We have to look to real-world examples, and this has been dropped by my opponent. We're going to be seeing that when we do things that are beneficial to us, we are more likely to make those same decisions in the future based on the benefit that happened to us in the past. So at the end of the round, just remember that altruism and self-interest go hand in hand, and it is why I can only urge a ballot in affirmation.
Okay, awesome. I'll use my remaining 36 seconds. And I'll start that now. Okay, that's time. So the order for this round is, once again, going to go framing and definitions, and then burdens, and then extensions on my case, and responses to my opponent's case, and then I'll do voters at the end. Is everyone all set? Okay, awesome. I'll start time on my first word. Once again, judges, what this round is essentially going to come down to is my dropped burden. My opponent responded for the first time since rebuttal in their rationale to this burden. Don't let them do that. Once again, I'm going to extend it with saying that I only have to prove that we value altruism as a motivator greater than or equal to self-interest to win this round. And I clearly outlined to you a way to do that. We look at the results of these actions and who is benefiting. The reason why is because otherwise this debate comes down to the one study that the affirmatives presented that I've essentially disproven with my Morneckin and Tomelso 07 evidence. What that tells you is that the only point that the affirmative has extended on the offense is this study that I've already disproven to you. And then once further, let's look to my case. I'm going to extend my C3 of giving. That's going to be crucial in this round. Let's explore why. I'm going to extend the subpoint A about parents. Skid Spot 17 is telling you that parents will give up meals for their kids. They put their lives at risks. What's that telling you is that we have a clear look into the motivation of these parents. Why are they doing these actions if not for altruistic intent? Once again, I'll remind you, there is no offense against these arguments because it was completely dropped, so let's extend that cleanly. What this is telling you is that essentially we can deduce the motivation, which is altruism. There is no self-benefit for these parents that are sacrificing for their kids because no alternative motivator has been proposed. Now let's look at this subpoint 2 of charity. This is also going to be crucial because what this tells you is that the least well-off in society, the people with the least wealth, the people with the least to benefit from giving up that material wealth are the ones who donate the most. What this tells you once again is that altruism is inherent no matter what your status is. This is a majority of the situation in the population in general. That's my Axelrad 14 card telling you that middle and lower class Americans donate the most. This has gone essentially totally unrefuted in this round. That's a clean voter. That's telling you that altruism is prioritized even though that's not my burden to prove to you. And on top of that, let's look to my opponent's case. Once again, they come up here in their last speech telling you that I haven't extended my case in the rebuttal. I'll tell you that frankly on the national stage, they should know by now that I don't have to extend my case in the rebuttal. That's what the consolidation is for. Now let's move on to their case. They're pointing out this study. This is the only offense they'll extend. Once again, I've already disproven this study to you with my Morneckin and Tomelso card, 707 card, telling you that little children, infants, will help others in distress with some cost to themselves and absolutely no benefit. They provide no other explanation. It's going to default to altruism. I've extended that cleanly. Now let's look at this. Let's look at some voters. First of all, you're voting on my burden, which goes cleanly dropped except for the rationale. Once again, what that means is that I only have to prove to you that altruism and self-interest can coexist. I sufficiently do that because in the majority of circumstances, I've outlined to you how through frontline workers, parents, charity, and in this Fleric 21 card, people will help strangers, help each other without chance of reciprocation. Or they'll act cooperatively, which once again is altruism and self-interest being valued to the same degree. Now, let's look at some other voters for this round. It's going to be that burden and that altruism and self-interest can coexist, and it's also going to be my C3, which goes completely dropped. That's clearly presenting you with the majority of this population who's acting out of altruism and self-interest. At the very least, altruism is valued equally. That's going to completely drop throughout this round. Good debate.
Please remain seated.
Yes.
Audience, please remain seated. Let's welcome the finalists in Big Questions debate for their introductions. But before I'd like to introduce them as a 6-year chair of this event, I would like to recognize this moment in the 7-year history that we have hosted this event. This is the first time that your top 4 Big Questions debaters are female presenting debaters. This is the first time we have 2 women finalist debaters. On behalf of your NSDA Big Questions team, debaters, please stand and remain standing for your recognition. We are proud to present to you on the affirmative, Code 103, Lily Williams from Aberdeen Central High School in South Dakota. She is coached by Levi Marolies, Kerry, Konda, Roger McCafferty, Riley McNeil, Lauren Wilkinson, and Mariah William. On the negative, Code 172, Isobel Maksoudian from Arlington High School in Massachusetts. She is coached by Donald H. Broussard, Jr. Congratulations, good luck, and good night from Phoenix. Congratulations.
Please welcome to the stage the finalists of Big Questions Debate presented by the John Templeton Foundation. Tonight, we recognize the top 4 teams in Big Questions, a debate format supported by a grant from the John Templeton Foundation. This year, students have grappled with complex worldview questions as they debate both sides of the topic resolved. Humans are primarily driven by self-interest. Thanks to the generosity of the John Templeton Foundation, the NSTA has given over $1.5 million to speech and debate programs since 2016, while creating opportunities for students to debate topics at the intersection of science and philosophy. Your winners in the 2023 Big Questions Debate are semifinalists receiving a $1,250 scholarship from the John Templeton Foundation. Leela Podanik from Lee's Summit North High School in Missouri, coached by Ben Jewell. Semifinalists receiving a $1,250 scholarship from the John Templeton Foundation. Riha Patel from Holy Trinity Episcopal Academy in Florida, coached by Rick Ramnath. Placing second and receiving a $2,500 scholarship from the John Templeton Foundation is Lily Williams from Aberdeen Central High School in South Dakota, coached by Kerry, Konda and Levi Marolies. And your champion, receiving a $5,000 scholarship from the John Templeton Foundation and winning on a 5-4 decision for the negative, Isobel Maksoudian from Arlington High School in Massachusetts, coached by Donald H. Broussard Jr.